One of my favorite parts of my morning routine is the time I spend reading. Every single morning, I sit down in this office chair, I grab a book, and I read, accompanied by a few essential tools. A cup of freshly brewed coffee, a pen for marking up my book so I can take notes on what I read later, and perhaps most importantly, this little green notebook that sits near my feet. This is my distraction journal. Whenever something pops into my head and pulls my attention away from what I'm reading, I simply jot down a note about it in this journal so my brain can safely dismiss it without being worried about forgetting it.
But there's something odd about my distraction journal. In between the pages of little notes about distractions, buying a deck umbrella or checking in with my team about something, there are pages upon pages of notes about my most creative and most significant work. In fact, my most recent entry in this distraction journal has nearly 6 pages about a video that I'm working on, nearly outlining the entire thing. So this is a distraction journal. This is meant for jotting down quick little notes and then getting back to what I was doing, and yet I find myself using it to do real, serious, significant work, even when I don't intend to. Meanwhile, half the time I sit down at a computer with the intent to do some quote-unquote serious work, I find myself staring at a blinking cursor. I'm kind of like, if you've seen the movie Limitless, I'm kind of like Bradley Cooper's character, Eddie Mora. I put in the time, I stay in the room, and yet nothing. Now, unlike Eddie, my solution to this problem is not taking a small translucent drug. Though while we're talking about Limitless, I do have to just take a second to admire the way the filmmakers use the change in color grading to illustrate the change in his mental state after taking NZT. That, from a filmmaking perspective, is just, it's great, but I digress. My solution here is not a drug, it's an idea. Creative work, or difficult, challenging work, is kind of like a non-Newtonian fluid. Now, if you've never heard this term before, you've probably at least seen one of these substances in the past. A non-Newtonian fluid acts just like a normal fluid most of the time, but when it's struck really quickly, its structure, its molecules, become very rigid, and the entire substance acts like a solid. So imagine if you had an entire bucket of this stuff and you wanted to submerge your hand into it. Well, you could do it very easily if you did it slowly, if you eased your hand in, maybe started with the fingertips first, but if you punched it, if you just slam your hand into it very quickly, the substance is going to tense up and it's going to be basically like punching a wall. It's not going to work. And this is exactly how I think of creative work as well. When you make these giant sweeping statements like Eddie Mora and Limitless, today's the day, I'm going to write the entire book today, you slam into the brick wall. The task you've set for yourself is so big, so intimidating that you just can't get into it. But ease into it, and you sometimes find yourself immersed in what psychologists call the flow state, a place where you're completely focused on your work. In this state, the act of creation is all-encompassing. It's fun, and you sometimes find yourself losing track of time until you come out of it. Now, getting into the flow state is not always easy, but it does seem like you can do it more consistently when you ease into your work. It's almost like you're tricking your brain into doing it. So for the rest of this video, I want to share 3 ideas that you can use to trick your brain into getting into the flow state. And the first one is very simple. Start incredibly small. Don't make these grand sweeping gestures that just make your work very intimidating. And the example I want to give here is actually about the book that I wrote a few years ago. So if you know anything about my work, you know that I've written a book called 10 Steps to Earning Awesome Grades. This book was actually not my first attempt to write a book. It was my second. My first attempt was a complete and utter failure, again, because I just intimidated myself and I never got started. And I made what I thought was a very big grand gesture that would force me to write the book. I literally bought a ticket to a conference down in Texas and flew down there. The conference was called Finish Up Weekend, and the entire point of that event was to get a bunch of creatives, a bunch of entrepreneurs into a room and have everyone pick one task and work as hard as possible for like 54 straight hours to get it done. So I showed up with the intent to write an entire book, thinking that being surrounded by all these people and having a grand intention would make me get the book done. But instead, I came out of that event with nothing to show for it. I remember staring at my word processor on my laptop, just unable to write anything that I was happy with. So for this book, I took a completely different approach. Number one, this was not even intended to be a book when I started it. This was gonna be like a 5,000 word max PDF, like a bonus download for people who join my email list over my website. And my approach to writing that PDF was to first create a big outline in Evernote that had 10 different sections and a bunch of little sub-bullets beneath them. And then with my habit tracking app, I set a goal of writing 500 words per day. So every single day I would pick one of those sub-bullets from that outline and sit down to write 500 words. And because that goal was so small, on a daily basis, just write 500 words about one tiny little topic from my outline, I wrote consistently. So consistently, in fact, that my 5,000 word PDF eventually ballooned into a 27,000 word book, which is now in print and an audiobook. So again, if you can start small, that will help you to put in effort consistently, and over time, those small little efforts will add up and you'll get something that is just as grand as you intended in the first place. All right, tactic number 2 is to assume that you are creating garbage, or at least allow yourself to create garbage. And this is another thing that really helped with the process of writing this book. When I sat down to write my 500 words per day, that was my only goal. Just write 500 words. They didn't have to be 500 beautifully edited words. They didn't have to all make it into the book. I just had to hit 500 words. And on some days, I really did not feel like writing. So I would spend, the first 200 or 300 words of that writing session writing about how I really didn't want to be there and I really didn't want to be doing that. But eventually I would build some momentum and I would usually get, at least 1 or 2 usable paragraphs out of that writing session. Finally, tactic number 3. Jot things down in non-ideal places. Do work in places that don't feel like they're made for work. And this brings us back to the distraction journal. This thing is not meant for intense writing. I don't use this, or at least I don't intend to use this to outline full videos. And I definitely don't intend to outline full videos while I'm sitting in my reading chair trying to get some reading done in the morning. I also don't intend to outline full videos as I'm coming out of the shower or when I'm taking a voice note in the car. But nonetheless, full videos get outlined in all those places sometimes. And again, it's because I'm in a non-ideal place. I'm in the least intimidating place in the world. And I think that the environment, the setup, can be just as intimidating as the task you set for yourself and can be just as paralyzing. So do things like keeping sticky notepads around the house, or keep a note-taking app on your phone that you don't consider to be the final place where your writing is going to live. Or if you're not a writer, for whatever task you often find yourself paralyzed on, find a non-ideal way to do it in just little tiny bursts. And you're sometimes gonna find yourself working more than you intended because you've slipped into the flow state. So in summary, number 1, start incredibly small. Number 2, allow yourself to create work that might be garbage, because some of it is not going to be. And finally, number 3, do work in non-ideal places. Keep sticky notes around, keep voice recorders around, whatever you have to do. Don't always force yourself to do work in the place you have designated for work, because sometimes that place is a bit intimidating. And if you want an example that isn't writing, another thing that I find quite intimidating is music production, especially as somebody who spent a long time working with audio for my videos and for my podcasts. I know probably too much about music production for my own good. So when I think about the process of writing and producing a song, I'm already thinking about automating reverb parameters and adding in tons of different additional tracks, and it can get intimidating and cause me to never start. So the music I've actually produced has almost universally started as me just messing around on my guitar or messing around on my piano, getting something that I liked, and then gradually adding layer upon layer, just sort of playing around until I get something that actually sounds pretty good. And if you would like an example of that, I recently put out a track called Icicle Swords over on my music YouTube channel, so I'll link that down in the description below, and you can take a listen if you are curious, and maybe subscribe to that channel if you want to see new tracks in the future. Also, if you want to see additional music stuff and some more bonus videos related to the kind of content I do on this channel, you may also want to follow me on Instagram over at thomasfrank. Beyond that, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button to show the YouTube algorithm what's up, get subscribed right there, or check out one more video on this channel right over here. Or, of course, don't do any of that and go do whatever it is that you want to do, because as always, I'm not your dad.